Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. And we have three wonderful guests that we're so excited to bring on. And I know you guys are excited too because you guys have been mentioning that in the comments on social media. And I'm just going to give you a quick intro to them. We're talking about Alexandria Villaseñor, who at the age of 13 co-founded the U.S. Youth Climate Strike Movement, part of the youth-led International Fridays for Future movement. Now, at the ripe old age of 16, Alexandria has become an internationally recognized environmental activist, public speaker, author, and founder of several more initiatives, including the climate education-focused nonprofit Earth Uprising International. Then we're also going to be talking to Pramilla Malick, who is a mother, community organizer, and environmental activist, and she's founder and chair of Protect Orange County. She was also a Democratic State Senate candidate in 2016 and 2018. And we'll be talking to James Cromwell, who is a well-known actor and activist, best known for his role in Babe, for which he received an Oscar nomination. He also starred in The Artist, The Queen, The Green Mile, and was on, of course, 6 Feet Under. And we're going to also be talking to James and Pramilla about going to jail together to protest the build out of a frack gas power plant in upstate New York. So I think we're ready to bring on Leslie Lee, my co-host of Struggle Session fame. Hi, Leslie.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, you?
Good.
What are your thoughts about what happened this week? Nina Turner, Andrew Cuomo. What are you thinking about?
Well, the Andrew Cuomo stuff, man. I I don't want to do any, anti Italian prejudice, but I do actually think what he did was wrong, and he should resign.
And now what you're saying is that's not because he's Italian,
Not
unrelated to
because
his
he's Italian.
heritage. You're not committing a hate crime here. You're just based on what he did.
Yes, just based on what he did, which is not normal and not how you're supposed to act. And his defense, which was so prepared. I like they had a video, like a pre-taped video ready. And it was exposed. We knew it was pre-taped because it started looping on CNN. They didn't stop it ahead of time. So it was pre-taped. And he basically explained that all this behavior, he tried to make it about this one woman so that he doesn't have to address like the 12 women who are saying he mistreated people, besides all the other people. Because the report didn't just say that he sexually harassed like dozens of women. It also said he was abusive in every way a boss can be abusive to anybody, basically.
Yes, and very important point from Tony DeMeo, which is that most Italians don't act like Andrew Cuomo. Thank you for saying that. Not all Italians. But he definitely tried to hide behind being Italian. Cuomo did, and he also tried to hide. It was so disgusting, that point where he like called out the report. So we're talking about the report from the Attorney General's office. Tish James released a report that basically corroborated the allegations of 11 women who had accused Cuomo of things ranging from inappropriate like commentary to actually cupping their breasts. He definitely, what he tried to do in this montage that he prepared, which I can't believe he prepared this. Like, this was not done by Oppo. This was his own attempt at damage control. He had a montage of himself, and I live streamed this on, when did it happen? Tuesday. Basically inappropriately touching people of all colors, backgrounds, creeds, ages. And you think we're joking, but we're not. And he also tried to hide behind, like, he tried to play the male ally, feminist ally, because he was like, the report went after women in my office, and that's because they're women. They get when have you seen a man maligned for being, having people
he
work
tried
hard,
to bring in Kamala Harris's
thing,
and Amy Klobuchar. I'm like,
yes,
wait a minute,
exactly.
How is that your defense, dude?
Right. I mean,
how does it help you?
Well, the irony is that he's like, when are men maligned for this? It's like, you're being maligned for this, rightly. So anyway,
he's saying this whole system's out of order, I guess, so nobody should be held accountable.
Right. Or he's just trying. Yeah, I mean, he's just trying to say, what is it? He's basically trying to throw like allegations of sexism at this report, which is corroborating allegations of sexism about him.
That he committed, yes.
That he committed, yeah. Really gross stuff. And then we, of course, know that Chris Cuomo, who is a very outspoken anti-Italian prejudice activist, as we know, because he compared the word Fredo to the N-word.
Yes.
He, as we know now, and we knew starting in May, but he did a lot of advising to his brother. Like we know he wrote statements that Cuomo said, Chris wrote statements that Andrew read basically verbatim. And at the same time decided it was not a conflict of interest to stay at CNN. And what he was doing is he was covering Andrew when Glenn Greenwald pointed this out. When Andrew was doing well, Chris had him on the show. Then when there's a scandal, he can't talk about him anymore. So it was inappropriate on both ends. And CNN offered Chris the chance to take a leave of absence while he advised his brother, and he declined. So they kind of openly embraced the conflict of interest. And then Chris actually apologized. He said it was a mistake that he was advising his brother, but then he said, "But I'm a family man first, job guy second," which, okay, then don't do your job at that point. You know, it's just such entitled impunity and gross. So I just want to highlight, were you looking at that comment, Leslie? I saw your eyes do that. The super chat. Oh, I'm going to read the super chat.
Okay, good.
Sexual assault aside, do we think any politician is nice or easy to work with IRL? Not defending AC at all. Honest question. Well, I think that's a fair question. I think that luckily we have a 150 plus page report documenting all of the stuff that he did that doesn't just fall under tough boss.
Yes. And if there were the case, put them all in jail. Like, or did we expect all slave owners to be nice? Like, I don't understand, like, how that, like, if all politicians are like abusive bosses, then they shouldn't be bosses. Like, that's the answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a systemic issue, and then, but I also feel like it's a moot point because we're not just talking about like Andrew Cuomo being hard to work with, busting people's balls. Like, he's touching women's breasts, touching their lower backs.
I mean, that's the thing. These are people who work for the Democrat Party, wanted to work for the Democrat Party all their lives, I'm sure, put up with all this crap from him. If they're willing to speak out, that means something.
Yes, that's true. Actually,
I don't think that they're just like weak people who are upset that they got yelled at a little bit because they screwed up at work. Like, that's like, you don't go this far. You don't basically put your entire career at risk over small stuff. Right.
And someone also points out it doesn't absolve him if most bosses are also shitheads, which is true.
Exactly.
That's a good point. Yeah. So we also want to talk about more evidence of how terrible the Democrats are. Do you want to? Okay, this is another. Yes, Cuomo should have been removed for the nursing home scandal. Yes, he is an extremely well qualified person for removal. Truly Renaissance man. You got the sexual harassment. You got the threats. We had Ron Kim on the show before. Remember, Leslie, who Cuomo told, "I will destroy you." He's a bully. He has blood on his hands over the nursing home. He gave liability immunity to nursing homes and hospitals because they were his donors. He snuck that into the budget. He has an austerity budget. He's basically a fiscal conservative. We know he covered up. We definitely know that he covered up the nursing home deaths. Like, that's not even disputable because his aide made the mistake of saying that out loud during a meeting. So, again, this guy should have been. It's kind of stunning. Do you think that he's definitely going to be definitely going to resign?
No, I don't think he's going to resign at all. What are the recall laws for New York City mayor? Well, I guess New York City governor, I should say.
Right. Yeah.
New York State governor. Well, I guess he does act like he's just the governor of the city, right?
Yeah, he kind of does. Yeah. Right. You know that de Blasio was so happy about this.
I know, right?
He's like so excited. Yeah. So just really quickly, and next story about why the Democrats are so terrible is, and of course we don't like the Republicans either, but I think everyone knows that, right, Leslie?
Yeah, I would assume so.
Oh, relevant point. Yes, he did work with the Repubs to keep out a Dem majority. Yes, the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus, which is basically a right-wing thing that it hamstrings the left. But someone wrote, can we mourn Nina Turner's loss? Really gut-wrenching. And that's exactly actually what I was going to be talking about next. Nina Turner did lose her congressional bid to Shontel Brown. It was a case where Nina Turner was winning. Shontel Brown was very much the corporate candidate. Nina Turner was the progressive candidate. She was smeared by the media. The New York Times, in the way only the New York Times can do, actually said in an article about her, some Democrats consider her blame her for Clinton's loss of Ohio, which is a pretty absurd thing to say in a reported piece. But that's just one example of how the odds against her. And there was a lot of money poured in. And I got to say something, Leslie. Have you seen this at all? Bree was trying to tweet about this, friend of show, Brianna Joy Gray, because there was a major, quote unquote, pro-Israel lobby that donated a lot of money to Shontel Brown, Nina's opponent. And that it looks like it had a major influence on the election. And that's a very awkward thing for people to talk about. And I get it. That's why as a Jewess, I'm going to keep saying it again and again. But people are getting called anti-Semites just for bringing this up. We saw it happen to Brianna Joy Gray. And again, I think we've talked a lot on the show about how being quote unquote pro-Israel is not pro-Jewish. There's a long, rich history of anti-Semitic Zionism. And, you can watch the interview that we did, various interviews that we've done on this subject. But she did lose. There's a lot of stuff that we can look at, a lot of takeaways. But I just thought we would case study QB, as usual, has some great clips. Can I just play you some clips
Sure.
about this? Okay.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
This really contentious primary going on in Ohio for Marcia Fudge's House seat. You're supporting Shontel Brown, but progressives are backing Nina Turner. Millions of dollars are being spent. Lots of attack ads, name calling. What do you think this outcome will mean for the direction of the party?
Well, it all depends upon what the results will be. I'm a great believer that we must do everything we can to elevate the political discourse in this country. We just had a president who lowered that discourse to a level unimaginable. We cannot have legislating by soundbite. And I am a big believer that we should be working on trying to make headway for the American people. But there seem to be people who are more interested in what the headline is, more interested in gotcha politics. And so I've been supporting Shontel because Shontel asked me to support her. Shontel is the kind of person that I think will help elevate the political discourse in this country. She is a big supporter of Joe Biden, and I have worked with her for about 10 years on Marcia Fudge's various events, and I think she will make an outstanding congressperson. And I do believe that, as my dad used to tell me all the time, the first sign of a good education is good manners. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing everything I possibly can to help people get elected to office who can bring that kind of attitude to the political discourse.
You're right about that. My parents used to say that as well. I forgot about that saying, and boy, we could sure.
No, they didn't. Stop lying. Stop lying.
Use some good
Stop lying.
Speaking of which, by the way, stop lying, good manners. You should have seen Don Lemon greet last night. Chris Cuomo did an entire show without mentioning Andrew Cuomo, obvs. And Don Lemon, when they were signing off, they do that little shift. One goes, the other one comes on, and Don Lemon was like, "I love you, brother." So corny, but so yeah. Stop lying. You don't think his parents said that too about good manners?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, what does that mean? That's just his way of throwing shade at Nina Turner for being, for saying things, speaking truth to power.
Well, Katie, here's another wrestling term I'm going to drop on the audience.
Great.
All right, so the term is angle, and angle just means storyline. Technically, it's kind of people use it to mean like in politics to mean like perspective. But in wrestling, it kind of means the same thing, but a storyline is just you trying to get a perspective over to someone, and so the story there is the story you're telling. So if Stone Cold Steve Austin wants to fight Bret Hart because he doesn't think Bret Hart respects him, that's what you call an angle, and they have a bunch of fights and feuds in this ongoing storyline. And so the angle that they're trying to sell, I guess, here is that the reason Nina Turner lost is because she sent like mean tweets about Democrats. It seems to be that was kind of the angle that they're trying to get over. It's like Nina Turner is just too hostile, and Nina Turner's fans were too hostile, and that's why she lost. And it has nothing to do with the big pile of money shoveled into this frankly nothing small race that nobody should be paying attention to. We're supposed to pretend like that's normal, like right. that like you're like, come on. It's an angle, and it's not. It's an angle, yeah. It's a storyline.
Well, also, I don't remember Clyburn, who again intervened on behalf of Biden and on behalf of Brown. I don't remember him criticizing Neera Tanden for her mean tweets, which
I know, right?
We can both attest to were way meaner than anything that Nina Turner ever said.
Yeah, they're trying to run the angle that worked on Neera.
I know.
On Nina Turner.
Yeah, but Neera is not Nina. Nina's not Neera. We have a couple of more clips. Nick, I put another clip in the chat. And everyone say hi to Nick Palm, who's helping, and Brushka, who's also helping. Both of them are working on the show. Nick, let me know if you got it. And if not, I can play it. See, this show is like, not every show gives you this amount of suspense. Just saying. Okay, I'm gonna share. Okay, here's friend of show, Al Sharpton, who's, by the way, one of the people who we saw kissing Cuomo in the montage. I don't know if you saw the montage, Leslie, but
yes, I did.
The full extent of it. So he kissed, my favorite person that he kissed up close and personal was Bill Clinton. That was beautiful to behold. Andrew Cuomo trying to exonerate himself by showing himself inappropriately touching Bill Clinton. And Al Sharpton was another person. So let's just play this now.
You're starting to sense really more of an urgency among Democrats to start following the guidance that you've been given on this program for a very long time. And that is just say no to latte liberals and get common sense.
Latte liberals? Is this 1997?
It is clear that there's a sense of urgency and a sense of you cannot continue to be intimidated by people that are not speaking on behalf of the people you represent. Hakeem Jeffries is a progressive. He's a prudent progressive. Jim Clyburn is a progressive, a prudent progressive. But for people to try and act like that the most extreme and offensive and insulting kind of name calling makes them a progressive when they're doing it against people that had to fight to get into the mainstream.
The Bernie bro angle.
Jim Clyburn was born in the mainstream. Here's a man who went to jail, him and his wife, fighting segregation. And here you have some trust fund babies
Al Sharpton,
telling him how to be
one of
a
the most hated black men in America, talking about how we have to turn down the rhetoric. White people hated you. You should have went away in like 1989 if you actually believe what you're saying.
That speak to community.
Yeah. And also, and yes, Clyburn did do important stuff during the civil rights movement. That's true. And he's also the biggest recipient of big farmer donations in all of Congress. So, you can have, people are complex and they have history, and you can do good things and you can also do bad things. So And Sharpton is probably, I mean, I like Sharpton's. We should do some of these workouts, Leslie. He goes on Instagram and he gives inspiring workout talks. We should watch them. But he's not the most, I mean, he's done a lot of good stuff. He's a very morally complicated person. Let's put it that. And somewhat opportunistic.
And like the idea that like, oh, you have to tone down your rhetoric, like that, he never did that until like MSNBC gave him a regular job.
Yeah, he used to get into like fist fights with people on like the shows in the 90s.
Yeah. He built his name on sensationalism and get in front of cameras.
Again, you've been talking about
here we go.
Some of these people that are so disconnected that speak to communities but never go to communities, never go where the people live. And you're talking specifically of communities of color. We saw it back in 2020. We saw that it was, in fact, black women predominantly, but also black men that helped Joe Biden win South Carolina and sweep to the presidency. And we've seen it in one race after another this year.
And the fact of the matter, Joe, is that a lot of the latte liberals, as I call them, act like we're what is it, that blacks in South Carolina are stupid? Or are they saying, no, we're voting our interests where they're practical? You can't, in race after race after race, see the majority of black voters, particularly black women, brown voters, vote against a lot of what they're talking about and act like for some reason they don't have enough sense to rise to their intellectual level. No, maybe they reject it because they have to practically raise families in situations that are disadvantaged and disproportionately not getting the goods and services that other communities are getting. And they rather have practical, prudent, progressive politicians rather than people that want to dream at their expense.
This is the other angle, that the reason, like, if progressive loses a race, that's because the voters, who are just a fraction of the people who live in the community,
thank you very much,
are super geniuses who speak for the entire community. And it's literally racist to say that once a politician is elected that they're a bad politician, or that another politician might have been better,
right,
or just had better policies.
Yeah, and also, what are these policies that are so fringe? Because sorry, but all these policies, Medicare for All, which was that Nina Turner supported, those do well, and black communities as an aggregate are more supportive of single payer than white communities. Like, that polls very well. So obviously it's not a monolith. But I mean, I'm sorry.
And it's silly to even talk about votes. Like, who wins most races? Whoever like gets the most money.
Of course,
a ton of money came in to defeat Nina Turner from outside. If that money hadn't come in, Nina Turner would have won.
Right.
Why did this woman even run against Nina Turner in the first place? Why was this nothing? So much money going to this nothing race? And and the reason are obvious, is because Nina Turner is on the bad list, the Hillary Clinton bad list. And, like, they decided that she can't have even a little bit of a career.
Right. Yep. And it was shameful the way that that Democratic Fund for Israel PAC came in, and it's embarrassing. And it shouldn't have happened. And that's really what tipped it. And that's just so shameful and embarrassing to hear Sharpton say that. It's so like that whole narrative of how it's some kind of privilege for, and you pointed out something really important, Leslie, which is like, most people aren't voters. So people like to pretend that voters speak for everyone. And of course, the people who are like feel the least represented are the people who don't vote at all.
Yes.
So when he's talking about what black voters want, this, that, and the other, he's talking about, first of all, he's full of it, but he's also not even talking about most people in any community.
Yeah, and it's always, it's the same angle that they've been running. They ran it on Bernie Sanders. Now they're running it on Nina Turner. I guess they're just going to run it over and over again. Bernie Bro's too angry. You're racist if you say a centrist is bad because black people voted for the centrist. Even though it's always just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction who could have just as easily voted for the other person. Like they like the other person too. So like, like that's the thing that we talked about over and over again in 2016 and 2020. Like people like Bernie too, even if they didn't vote for him. So where was this idea that? But the implication used by people was always that Bernie has a race problem and black people don't like him, and he is therefore racist. When it was like, no, people just also liked other people in the race.
Right. And also the biggest thing against him, I think I've always said, was that, he, that people thought that he wasn't electable. Right. And that was because the media kept saying that.
Yeah, because every time you turn on the MSNBC, it was somebody saying he wasn't electable.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that was really shameful. And not a fan. So we're going to bring in, that was great. And I'm so excited to be bringing in our guests. Let's see if they're ready. I realized that one of them is not in the back. Do you know where Pramilla is? Okay. So, we're going to start bringing on our guests. Very excited about this. You know them, some of them. You'll love them. And we're going to we'll do the super chats during specific breaks because I don't want to distract the guests. So let's bring into the show. We're going to start off with James Cromwell. You know him. You definitely know him and love him. He's been in films such as The Artist, The Queen, Babe, of course, The Green Mile, Deep Impact, also on shows Succession and 6 Feet Under, and a major activist in ways that you don't even know about. So welcome, Jamie. Thank you for coming.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are also really excited to bring into the show Alexandria Villaseñor, who is, again, a major youth climate activist. She co-founded the U.S. Youth Climate Strike Movement, part of the youth-led International Fridays for Future movement. And now she's all grown up and 16, and she's an environmental activist, public speaker, author, and founder of several more initiatives, including the climate education-focused nonprofit Earth Uprising International. She's also an author. We'll talk to her about that. Welcome, Alexandria. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And then we're going to bring on sometime later. Did I just hear? Oh, saved by the beep sound. Pramilla Malick, who is an environmental activist, mother, community organizer, founder and chair of Protect Orange County. And she was also a Democratic state Senate candidate in 2016 and 2018. So welcome, Pramilla.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
Thanks for coming. Thank you all so much for joining. This is Leslie Lee, in case I think, Pramilla, you didn't get to meet Leslie.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And feel free to, Pramilla, put in your last name and also any organization or hashtag, handle that you want. But wanted to ask you guys to start off, I guess, what is on your minds right now? What is the biggest challenge facing us at the moment? I mean, I know it's a whole listicle that we could put together, but what do you think the most urgent thing to be talking about and looking at is?
Survival of all life on this planet.
That's a big one.
Well, I agree with that. I'm, organizing with other young people to make sure that we get climate action. So right now, what's really important to me is bringing in young people into the climate movement and just also opening it up to everyone, making sure that everybody feels like they can be an activist is really important.
I would agree with Jamie as well. I think we need to start understanding the systemic causes of all of our multitude of crises that we face at this moment.
And I just wanted to know, before we got into the policy, how each of you got into this movement, like your personal connection to it.
Pramilla, why don't you go ahead?
I began this fight about 10 years ago when my community in upstate New York which is a protected agricultural district, was suddenly targeted with a massive industrial facility known as a gas compressor station. And it turns out that facility was part of a large network to bring fracked gas from Pennsylvania to New York City. And that's when I realized that we were on the precipice of both a public health catastrophe, but also a climate catastrophe.
Yeah, I guess I can go next. I'm originally from Northern California, but in August of 2018, I actually moved to New York City. And so I ended up going back and forth between the two at the time quite a bit because I had family in both coasts. And so during one trip back to my hometown in Northern California, I was there when one of the worst wildfires at the time happened, the Camp Fire in Paradise, California. And so that was a horrible wildfire, and the air quality got over 350 AQI, which is in like the hazardous area, and at one point it was the worst air quality in the world. And so being so close to that fire, I ended up getting so much of the smoke, and it was seeping into my home, so my family had to roll up wet towels and put them under windows and doors to keep the smoke from coming in. And it was a really scary situation because I have asthma, and so it ended up making me really sick. And so after coming back to New York at the time after that fire, I was really upset, and I wanted to do something and find out why that was happening. And I started researching about wildfires, and I saw the connection between climate change and California's wildfires. And that was like the first motivator for me to get involved and do something. That's how my activism started. But seeing the wildfire still happening is still a reminder. And there was a wildfire that started actually yesterday. And, on the TV, it had like this huge evacuation alert. So it's always a reminder of why I got involved in the first place.
I was an unemployed actor in New York. My father cut a little squib out of the New York Times that they were looking for actors and directors to go down south with this theater called the Free Southern Theater. I knew nothing about the South. I got the job. I went down. I got off the plane. I went to the place where we were going to stay. It had a plaque on the door saying "Coloreds Only." I thought, wow, that's interesting. That must be a throwback to the Civil War. Went upstairs. Nice black lady showed us to the room. The head of the theater, John O'Neill, said, "Let's go to dinner." He's black. We go to this restaurant in New Orleans. We get the owner comes over and says, "You can't be in the restaurant." I've never been thrown out of a restaurant before, so I ball up my fist. And John says, "No. I'll advise him that he's abrogating our civil rights." And so I got an education from the minister where we rehearsed Waiting for Godot and Pearly Victorious. And then we traveled into Mississippi in 1963. And a kid that I had played football with in high school, I didn't know it was him. We knew 3 civil rights workers were missing, but it was Mickey Schwerner. I went to school with Mickey. And so by being in the freedom houses and listening to people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who attended a performance, I got radicalized in terms of the civil rights movement. Then I went back to New York, and that's when we had the huge anti-war protests. We shut down the entirety of Washington. There were 100,000 of us on an island outside of the White House. And then I worked for the Black Panthers. So I sort of had this. It's always been part of me. And when I got to this little backwater, this bucolic place called Warwick, I thought, well, now what do I do? Because I'm an animal rights activist and I work with PETA, but I wanted to do something out of the community. And I heard about this. And I think I went to a demonstration that Pramilla had organized at the plant site. And I talked to her. And once you talk to Pramilla, you're engaged. And I thought it was really important, and that there was an intersectionality between all the things that I had been involved in. They all come out of one thing, which is our endless, important struggle against capitalism and the dehumanization of people for the benefit of profit. And it's always been that. That was the cause of the slavery in the South. That was the cause of the war in Southeast Asia. That was the cause of the reason that the Panthers organized in Oakland to bring jobs and meals and opportunity and safety to the people of Oakland. So it's always the same, and it's the same here, and it's the same now. And we're either going to go under because we maintain this bloody system, or we're going to have a paradigm shift, which happens, of course, on the inside, in the heart, and then you manifest it out into the world, and we will save this planet.
And before we get into more about the plant and this paradigm shift you're calling for, just so people know, so those three men, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, they were missing, and then they were found killed, and they were registering people to vote in Mississippi. So you played football with Mickey Schwerner?
Yeah, in a place called Pelham Manor, New York, just outside of New York City. He was out of Chicago because he was working with CORE. I was sponsored by SNCC. So we didn't know that. And they didn't pay any attention to us because they thought we were a joke. An integrated theater showing Waiting for Godot to Black people who had never seen a television show or a movie or the theater. And suddenly we're bringing this mammothly abstract play, which it really isn't, but to Black people. And Fannie Lou Hamer stood up at the intermission and turned to the audience and said, I want you people to listen to this play because we're not doing what those two guys are doing. We're not waiting for anybody to tell us what to do. We're taking what we need. And that was Fannie Lou Hamer. So she understood the play.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow, what an amazing story.
Yeah. Wow. And so let's talk about this plant. Pramilla and Jamie, how did you guys meet protesting this? And can you just tell people what this plant is?
Pramilla can.
Okay.
The plant, I'm laughing because when I first spoke to James, I didn't quite really know who he was. And he called and said, how can I help? And I said, well, we need a place to meet. So, I said, what do you do? He said, he's an actor. I said, oh, well, we need a place to meet. Do you think you can find us a theater or something where we can meet? Anyway,
That's so funny.
CPV is a 650 megawatt frack gas power plant that we say was built on bribes and built on lies. It's been permitted now for over 10 years. Under development for 10 years, the company Competitive Power Ventures that built it, they built these type of plants all over the country. And right now, as we speak, they're trying to get one built in Chicago. But it is basically a plant to give a market to the fracking enterprise and to plug New York City into frack gas dependency for the next 40 years. New York City is the second largest consumer of power in the entire world, second only to Tokyo. So it's a huge market for this company. And, we, as I said, began fighting the compressor station. The compressor station turned out to be a critical component of this power plant project. And as I said, it's a 10-year permitting process. Turns out Governor Cuomo was getting a lot of campaign donations from the company. And, we knew there was corruption underway because the plant would otherwise not have been permitted because of all of the environmental implications of it. And it turns out that we were vindicated and validated when Governor Cuomo's closest aide was convicted of taking bribery money from the company executive, Peter Braith Kelly. I can talk more about him and his background if you want, but that's really the sum of it. And the plant is going to, or has, increased New York State's greenhouse gas emissions by 10% of the entire power sector. So just like that, the state flipped a switch and we have increased our greenhouse gas emissions in an era and a time period when we all know and ostensibly agree that we should be reducing them. So there's a real disconnect there.
And so you were, I guess she had you at Cuomo, Jamie, or the Democrats? I'm just thinking of she had me at hello. How she hooked you into the...
She did have, well, because because her stand is so principled, because the logic is irrefutable, because the emergency is so dire, because you have to do action, you have to stop it at this local level, because this gas, this benign natural gas they call it. I went down to Dimmock, I think a lot of us did, to see where this gas was coming from. They are destroying the most beautiful parts of Pennsylvania. Fracking is an incredibly destructive. Look what it's doing in Oklahoma, now the earthquake capital of the world. It spews methane. They burn off the methane pollutants. What's in the fracking water, the chemicals, which we don't know about because Cheney got it off the books when he worked for Halliburton, when he was vice president. So the thing is a cesspool, and it's a cesspool on every level. So the corruption goes all the way up through the local government in the community and the judge, and how the planning commission that allows plant to go forward was completely replaced. When they voted against it, they were replaced by people who, of course, would vote for it, and we have no idea what perks they got. And this corruption goes all the way up, not only to our governor, it goes all the way up into Congress and the president, and the legalized bribery, which masquerades as free election in this country, when actually what the donors are doing are buying the voices and the votes necessary to keep them in power. If you can crack that, if I could be part of the fist that breaks that dike through so that the water of truth floods over and drowns them all, I would be a very happy man.
Yeah, because I remember first hearing about fracking of all places, MSNBC, over a decade ago, and it was either Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow, and they were just describing what it was, and it sounded like something that a Bond villain would come up with in order to get power. It's sending an unimaginable amount of water into the earth in a way that creates earthquakes to get this fossil fuel that we're supposed to be getting off of, right? And and as you said, it's going to make us more dependent on it because all this money has been built towards it. I remember, again, MSNBC was on the ball about this 10 years ago. It's like, we're going to stop fracking. Fracking cannot continue to exist, but it seems like it's just become more essential and entrenched, and now it's just like Republican or Democrat, because it was a partisan issue, at least ostensibly a partisan issue, because it was Bush who opened up the fracking permits, and the idea was that once Obama got in office, he's going to crack down on fracking. When turned out the exact opposite happened, and now it's just established that fracking is just something we do and is going to be with us, even though it's completely insane thing to do to the earth.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's not going to be with us for very long, because if we keep this up, we aren't going to have a planet to live on. It'll be too hot, and there'll be too many fires and too many drought, and not enough food and not enough water. So listen, it's an end game, and they know it's an end game, and they don't have a solution to keep the money in their purses and still solve the problem. So they're just winging it. They have no idea. They're out of control, and they're insane.
And so, Alexandria, how is the youth climate movement addressing this problem? The fracking and
I think the way that the youth climate movement addresses any problem is just by protesting. And so, fracking is a really big issue, and especially because it affects marginalized communities and low-income communities the most. And so one thing that the youth climate movement, especially Fridays for Future right now, is really focusing on a lot is MAPA activists and highlighting their voices. So MAPA is most affected people in areas. And so basically it's an environmental justice issue, and that's why we really are protesting it even more so. And one of the times that we're protesting a lot is actually coming up next month, September 27th, September 24th, we're striking And we have a whole list of demands that kind of cover a bunch of different issues. And so one thing is, cutting emissions drastically by divesting from fossil fuels and ending its extraction, burning, and use. And so we have just this whole list of demands that we have. And so at a lot of our protests, fracking is usually in some of our demands because it, goes along with a lot of different issues as well. Because fracking does poison communities and the land in addition to contributing to emissions and making climate change worse. So it's also really a human rights issue as well, not just a climate issue. And so I think that fracking is something that kind of intersects with so many different other activists. If you're a climate activist, if you're a human rights activist, if you're a social justice activist, fracking should really be something that is talked about in all of those spaces.
And do you think that people your age are receptive to this? Do you think that there's more of a sense of urgency for people your age than people who are older? For sure. I think that my generation is really is so active just because we are on such a tight crunch. We've basically grown up in a world that has been altered because of climate change. So there's a lot of things that my generation has experienced that past generations haven't necessarily. So growing up, when I was really young, I remember certain species like in California, like monarch butterflies were my favorite thing ever. But in the past couple of years, they've drastically declined and they're actually heading towards extinction in California. And so it's really upsetting because there's so many things that are changing. But my generation is going to be impacted in every single way because of climate change. It's going to affect our futures by, where we end up living, what kind of jobs we have, where we end up going to school. A lot of young people are even having conversations about whether or not they want children because of climate change. So it kind of affects us in every single way. And I think that makes our motivation and our passion for this so much more so. And so we found a way to really get involved in climate activism and use our own personal voices, but also rally with people who've been activists before us, because since we're on such a time crunch, it's so important to learn from people who've been doing this for years. That way we find the most effective way to take action. And just quickly want to remind everyone to like this stream and share this stream because it's so important what we're talking about. We want to make sure as many people come and listen to it and see it as possible. Obviously, we're going to keep this up for everyone to see and we're going to clip it, but we want to make sure people catch this live. So everyone do your part, share this out. And I wanted to actually ask you, all of you, where you think we went wrong. I mean, it's 51 years ago was the first Earth Day. There hasn't been a lot of progress made. I mean, obviously that's because unlike other issues, this is a physical issue, right? Like people compare it to gender equality, racism, homophobia. Those things are on different trajectories. Kind of like class exploitation, you could say class exploitation and climate change are both on a parallel track where it just gets worse and worse, or inequality, I would say, stratification. But so what has to happen? What hasn't been able to happen? What are the mistakes that have been made, and what needs to happen next? I know, very easy questions, but
I mean, I can tell you what our experiences have been. I think the one lesson we learned is that the real cause of the climate crisis is corruption. So it is, these fossil fuel interests really buying public policy through our politicians. But the other thing I realized is that climate truth is the crack between denial and deception. Climate denial being on the right, but climate deception being on the left. Because we have to remember that it was the Obama presidency that ushered in fracking into the United States, and gas was peddled as a bridge fuel ironically, under the narrative of fighting climate change. And that was done not only by Democratic politicians, but neoliberal environmental groups like NRDC, Sierra Club. They all peddled that false narrative. I'd also say, in 2015, United States started producing more power from methane than any other source of power. So it's not just that we did things wrong. I mean, that we didn't do things that we should be doing. We actually went in the wrong direction, because methane has 100 times the global warming impact as CO2. So it is by far the worst possible greenhouse gas there is. And all of the scientists that I've spoken to say the single most important thing that we can do immediately and have the greatest impact on the climate is cutting methane emissions. So that means both from burning gas as well as from industrial agriculture. So those are the two things we have to do. And, sadly, Obama's decade is going to go down as the last and lost decade to act on climate. I'm sad to say that.
So the last decade, though, so that's you're saying that he did work on it, or are you saying that the way he worked on it?
No, last and lost. Last.
So what is that?
He took us in the wrong direction.
So he could have. That was like the last chance. You're saying?
That was the last chance to actually do something meaningful. I think at this point, it's going to all be about mitigation, trying to basically survive as best we can. But yeah, I mean, the science is clear. We should have done this 10 years ago. We should have done. I mean, James Hansen testified to Congress in 1986, and almost everything he predicted has come true. And not only is it coming true, but it's coming true much faster than scientists predicted. Scientists originally had said we're going to lose the ice on the Arctic and the Antarctic within 80 years, but it's happening now by 2021. I mean, just looking at some of the metrics, the IPCC just came out with a report recently, and they said that meteorologists say there's a 40% chance we're going to cross the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold by 2026. That's 5 years away. And that we're likely going to go to 3 degrees Celsius. And of course, Celsius is a much greater differential than Fahrenheit. So yeah, I mean, we are in a climate emergency. It is catastrophic. I feel my heart breaks for all of the young people, because they're basically spinning their wheels, protesting for things like the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is so unbelievably abstract. It's essentially a plan for a plan. And given that kind of urgency and crisis we face today, I think it's irrational to be talking about a plan for a plan. We need to have clear, verifiable actions, measurable actions that can't be gamed, that can't be obfuscated, that can't be played around with. I mean, Greta Thunberg just put out a tweet recently, and I agree with her 100%. She called the policies being proposed creative carbon accounting and nothing but loopholes. And she's right. We are, in essence, doing nothing at best, and at worst, we're doing more damage than if we were doing nothing by building power plants like CPV.
Right.
I think in terms of the actions that we have taken, we fail to recognize how powerful our adversary is, and that the things that people have done. We protested in the 60s. We protested in the 70s. We protested all in the entirety of my life. We've been protesting petitions, demonstrations, marches, sit-ins, getting civil disobedience, although I think that does work. We've been trying things that basically have not worked. First of all, we've not recognized what the root cause is and identified it and found a way to combat it, which of course is capitalism. And then we have failed to recognize that all of our institutions have failed. Every institution has failed. The fourth estate has failed. The health program has failed. The educational department has failed. Every institution, our government is legalized bribery. So now once you know this and you know have a sense about what you're up against, you have to begin to think creatively. I believe that this is not going to happen in time unless there is this thing that I guess I hope people accept it for what it is, because it is a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift occurs first in the person, as an individual, recognizing their responsibility and dedicating themselves to make sure that the end of this crisis is an idea whose time has come. Now, if you can do that, if you commit that, then everything that you do is in support of that end. If you want to save the planet and you're dedicated to doing something, why would you not look at something that is right in front of you that you can do, that's effortless, and you don't need an organization? Stop eating meat. Stop contributing to the methane gas released by the agricultural industry, which is even above transportation. And that would to do it one day a week, so that we can start with very small things and they can lead to the things. When I was in Ethiopia in 1971, every student in the entirety of Ethiopia said, I'm not going to school, I strike. If you want to have a country and you want it to have a benefit for our generation, then you have to change it. If you don't change it, I will not participate in it. You cannot get people of my age, people above 30, to commit themselves because they are already entangled in a system which says there is only one tool, and that is a hammer, so everything else is a nail. If the kids would realize that they have the power, that they can actually close it down, if they organize, if they do what Greta did in front of her seat of government, just be there. Do what Cori Bush did. Just sit there and not participate. I tell you, the halls of power would begin to shake, and we'd make a big change.
Yeah, this kind of goes off of what both of you actually said. I think one of the biggest mistakes that have been made, I guess, is focusing on individual action more than anything, because I think in some ways that was a distraction. And what I mean by that is, in school, I did not learn about climate change until I was probably like 12. That's when I fully understood the extent, because in school, all I would really learn is reduce, reuse, recycle, which is not nearly enough for the extent of this crisis. And so actually recently I did, my school did this, choose whatever essay you want to focus on, just choose a topic. And one was actually about the environment. And so I chose one about individual action. And after researching, I found out that the fossil fuel industry actually created the narrative of your own personal carbon footprint. And it was created by the fossil fuel industry. And so because of greed, the fossil fuel industry has tried to foist the responsibility of climate change onto the consumer by making it about our personal habits and consumer demands. I remember there was, I forget exactly who it was. I think it was BP put out this tweet one time saying here's how to calculate your own carbon footprint. But it's well, what is yours? Stop deflecting. What is your own carbon footprint? And so I think that one thing that we kind of have to do now, after years of kind of this false narrative of that, is focus on pushing for systematic change. So sure, take the individual action of coming together with a group of people to go out and protest, to go out and strike, to push for the systemic change. Contact your government representatives, get involved in doing something that actually pushes for government and that systemic change that we need.
And what is your relationship with Greta? Can you talk about your relationship with Greta Thunberg? That's how Amy Goodman says it. Thunberg? I don't know how to pronounce it. Thunberg?
Thunberg, yeah.
Okay.
Greta has been very supportive of so many activists. And what I really like about the youth climate movement is that we kind of connect with people all around the world through this one movement. And so Greta was the inspiration for me to get involved. And she was also the inspiration for so many other people. When I first started striking, I started striking in front of the United Nations headquarters. And I did that every Friday for over a year, and until the beginning of the pandemic, of course. But I would do that, and it was freezing cold. And I'm, from California, can't really do the cold. So I've sent her a message how do you stay out for so long? And she would give me advice. And so, I think what's really inspiring about the youth movement is just how we meet so many other people who give us advice and you know, how to keep going in this movement. And that's what I really like, is that support, because it's hard to be an activist for so long if you don't have a group of people to do it with, because this is more of a marathon and it's not a sprint. And so having a group of people to do it with makes it so much better for the long run.
And what do all of you see as the role of capitalism in the world and in climate change? How much can we separate those two things? How much do we have to attack one to attack the other?
They're the same. To attack one, you are attacking the other. They're in bed together, and their child is despair.
I mean, there's a fundamental conflict between fighting climate change and capitalism, because capitalism in and of itself is antithetical to life. It deems all life expendable. It commodifies everything and everyone and every sentient being as well. And climate change is all about the survival of life. So those two things are at odds with each other. And that's why, you know, totally agree with Jamie in terms of having a paradigm shift and a different framework. And all of the climate policies that are being promoted are still being promoted with a capitalist framework. And that is not going to solve the climate crisis. Stephen Donziger, who I know you had on your show, he has proposed that all fossil fuel interests be nationalized. I agree 100%, because that is the easiest, fastest way of dismantling fossil fuel interest, is to nationalize them, take the profit motive out, and then dismantle them.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything that's been said. You know, I think that the systems of oppression caused the climate crisis. So racism, sexism, and of course, like capitalism, all contributed to this crisis. And so we need to change our fossil fuel based economy to be able to actually get change. And right now, money and profit has been placed over the people. And I think that really needs to change. So no unlimited growth. You can't have growth on a finite planet. And so everything really needs to change.
And now that you guys are all here, I mean, what do you have any ideas that you want to suggest to each other, with each other? Trying to have, I mean, there's a lot more terrible stuff we can talk about, don't worry, but it's sometimes nice to try to come up with solutions as a group.
It's going to take a commitment and an ability to make sacrifices that is very difficult for me to believe that a culture like ours, which has been living off the fat of the world and the transportation of the manipulation and accumulation of wealth from all these other countries. Just look at what's happening with the COVID vaccine. Now that we have this vaccine and beginning to think about 3 shots for the American public, they're charging European nations $43 billion to give them the rest of the vaccine. And they're going to do that to third world countries as well. So if we can't get out of our way of thinking that, you know, as Shakespeare said, they cannot see because they do not feel. If we can't have empathy for the water keepers in Minnesota and the people in Somalia and the people in Yemen, if we can't understand, then the people right in front of us that we step over, who are unhoused, who have no place to go, the people who have been evicted from, if we can't see that that's what government is supposed to, they're supposed to protect the people, but of course they don't. They only protect the donors. So I think if we can start to take responsibility for our own actions, and we can start to put our actions, our words into action, and join and become part of a group that has a focus and has a platform and has the willingness and the determination to continue until the task is achieved.
Yeah. And what about Biden's role in response to this? What do you think about that? I thought Biden and I thought Cuomo were both anti-fracking.
No.
I know that was said with a big wink. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that one of the tools, one of the suggestions I have is stop paying attention to the rhetoric and only pay attention to the record. Only pay attention to how these politicians are voting. Only pay attention to their actions. Only pay attention to what they're pushing, and what kinds of actions they'll take to push forth that agenda. Anyone, and almost everyone will say that they're against climate change. Most of them will also say they support the Green New Deal. That really literally means nothing. So I think we need to get over that and stop rewarding them for just saying nice things, and really demand some serious actions on their parts. I think Jamie and I talked the other day, and we kind of made a list. One of them was, don't listen to people over 30, to the young people.
We all of us have to shut up except for Alexandria. A moment of silence from now until the end of the show. Yeah.
Except for James Hansen, who is known as the father of climate science, and who warned us about this in decades ago. I would also say, in terms of demanding policies, only demand policies that are measurable and verifiable. Anything abstract, there is no time for abstract plans for a plan. And again, a very simple, easy, measurable, verifiable demand would be to stop burning methane and stop animal agriculture. Those two demands are very clear and not abstract, and they can be verified. I also think we need to demand overturning Citizens United needs to be part and parcel of the climate change demand, because, again, corruption is why we have a climate crisis. As Jamie suggested, people should go vegan if they can, or start one day a week just not eating meat. Make it 2 days, then make it 3 days. That's something that individuals can do. But, as Alexandra pointed out, the climate crisis is a result of policy failure by our elected officials. We didn't choose to have gas guzzling cars. The government made that decision that they were going to, not allow the development of electric vehicles. We didn't, choose to allow this gas-fired power plant. Government did that. So, even though there are some individual actions that, going vegan is definitely one type of individual action that we can take. And I would also, my big recommendation to anyone who cares about the climate is stop listening to NGOs. Stop listening to the environmental groups. They have misled us for the past decade, and they will continue to mislead us. They're entrenched with fossil fuel money. And certainly don't listen to paid activists, because, again, the other thing is, since we are a society right now organized by capital, the best way to defeat these interests is to cost them money. Take actions that cost them money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about keep going.
Yeah, just really quickly. I think there are so many urgent planetary crises happening right now, like the article about the Gulf Stream shutting down. And so we need urgent action. And in some cases, electoral politics is not really moving fast enough. And so we really do gotta get some sort of action right now. And I think that we need even more. And I'm not sure if our current political framework can even handle responding in time to what we need.
No, it can't. That's why we have to change that framework. That's what the paradigm shift is. A different way of looking at the necessity of the state. We're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see that what Dennis Kucinich said, the government is an engine for the shifting of the wealth from the people upwards. That's what it's designed for. It's designed to protect the status quo, to enforce laws, to divide us and make us responsible, blamed rather than responsible.
Yeah, so they can not be responsible. They can blame us instead.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. And what about like harassing people, embarrassing people? I have real faith in the power of embarrassing people's kids, embarrassing parents. Like, I don't mean bullying at all, but somehow, like, if I feel like young people can help shame their parents. Young people are very powerful people. Like, can't we just make it so that they're just humiliated about their parents and by their parents if they're evil capitalists who are killing people?
I think that's I totally agree with that. Actually, there's actually an article that came out a while ago that said that teenage girls are leading the fight and changing their parents' opinions about climate change, which is totally true, because there were some protests that I was at, and there would be some girls who came and said that their parents wouldn't allow them to come, but then they'd like have serious conversations with their parents, and some of them would like cry to their parents saying like, this is my future, it's being ruined by you adults, and stuff like that, who are not taking action. And she ended up being allowed to come to the strike, which is great. So it really worked. But I think that there are also places like on social media now that youth have so much access to that also makes it easier to kind of change opinions of adults, like on TikTok as well, especially. Like, there's so many videos that young people do kind of relating with each other, but also kind of trying to change their parents' opinions about certain issues. So I think that young people are definitely good at what they're supposed to be. Young people are good at what they're supposed to be doing, like being stubborn. And if they're stubborn to their parents about climate change, then you know that it's working.
Yeah. I don't get it. People are selfish. They need to be confronted with like what'll happen to the planet, their own grandkids, their own kids. Or if not even that deep, just humiliated. Like, it's cool. Like you were saying, rhetoric is not enough, right? But we can use this coolness factor, even though it can be deceptive, but it is cool now, right? Like, the Green New Deal is considered cool and progressive, and climate change is considered something that we need to take seriously. So I'm also just for really just shaming people. I haven't thought this out too much, but we can brainstorm. Leslie, do you have any ideas about this? I feel like you, because of your massive wealth of knowledge about wrestling, maybe you have some ideas about this, or just how people act. I feel like you really understand the powerful in a way that most don't, because you were used to villains.
I think we should name more of the villains. Like, I don't know the names of very many CEOs of any of these companies, or the people building these power plants, and these are the people destroying the world. Like, we know the name of the person who gets into a confrontation at the coffee shop and embarrasses themselves, or says something bad or bigoted or whatever. But we don't know the names of the people who are destroying the planet.
Yeah.
Jamie Dimon is one who's destroying him, Jamie Dimon?
Oh, that is one name we know.
Jamie Dimon is one.
You know that name.
He is one,
And all the other bankers at Goldman Sachs and Citibank and all those other banks that bankroll a totally bankrupt energy producer, which is the frack gas industry, which is mortgaged to its teeth with all the loans that they have to pay back. So the whole system is built as this house of cards. All you have to do is pull the one card out, and the whole bloody thing collapses.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna have to get a list of names. I like that. Find out if they have kids. Again, I'm not targeting kids. I want to appeal to, I feel like their kids are going to be receptive, and then we'll be able to, I mean, I'm just, no one on the show is vouching for this. I'm not even vouching for it. I'm just exploring it. I'm trying to look into the power of, I think shame is this is like so antithetical to Alexandria, what you're doing. You're full of hope, and that's great. And that's your lane. I'm trying to figure out another one, because, all hands on deck. We have to all cover all areas.
Nobody really appreciates being shamed, though, right? It would be much better to tell them the truth and see if the truth can set them free.
But I don't mean they'd be shamed. Their kids would be embarrassed. That's what I'm hoping their kids would be embarrassed, because I think that people they would pressure their parents to stop doing it.
Pressure is good.
We need to shame the polluters, shame the politician climate deniers. But then I think what youth need to lead the fight on is at least re-educating their parents.
Yes.
I think a lot of, parents don't necessarily know, or they've been given misinformation for so many years. And so re-educating is important. And that's what
re-education camps. I like that too. Re-education camps for the powerful. But I mean, I'm there's a difference between the people who really don't know and then the people who really know and either don't care or are paid to not care and paid to not believe it, right? Like, I think you're totally right that there are a lot of people who just don't have and that's another question, how do we raise awareness? But I'm talking about the very powerful people, like the bankers, the politicians who know this stuff.
I saw a program where 2 women farmers from Mali came to the Midwest because they recognized that whatever was happening in Mali ultimately came from the United States. And so they came to the middle of the United States and they explained what was happening to them in Mali, the lack of rain, the soil, farming methods, and almost to a person, the people that they talked to said, listen, I'm sorry, it's just not my issue. Whatever, global warming, whatever that is. I mean, I have my own thing. I got to put a crop in. I got to get it done. I'm too busy to do this. They don't yet see that that's a dead end. If they can't take responsibility for what they do and learn how to do it better, then they'll be in the same boat that the woman from Mali is in within 5 years.
And can you talk specifically about either one of you, about any one of you, Biden and Cuomo, and what their roles have been?
I mean, Cuomo has been a climate deceiver, right? I mean, that's, as I said, deception on the left, denial on the right. He banned fracking at the same time that he was permitting a power plant that would depend on 150 to 200 fracking wells per year. And then you combine it with another plant that he approved, Cricket Valley, which has increased the state's greenhouse gas emissions by 15% of the power sector. So combine the two, that's 25%. Both these plants just became operational in the last 2 years, all the time that he was being praised and glorified by the environmental groups who, thank you, Cuomo, and all of the banners and rallies, supporting him and declaring him a climate hero. The bill that he passed, the CLCPA, again, it promised, 50% reduction by 2030 and then 80% by 2040. But they forgot to mention 2 loopholes here. That the state was increasing emissions by 25%. At the same time, they were saying they're going to reduce it by 40%. And also they were counting from 1990 levels. They weren't counting from where we are today. And, we'd already reduced emissions from 1990 levels by 12%. So that was another, kind of misleading, accounting acrobatics that they do with climate policy. So, and he, a lot of people are talking now about how powerful of a guy he was, how much of a bully he was, but we're all forgetting what made him powerful. How did he become powerful? He became powerful because of all the money he had. And all the money he had essentially came from 15 billionaires that represent the hedge fund industry, the real estate industry, and the fossil fuel industry, fossil fuel being number 1. So do you think they're going to donate all this money to this guy and he's actually going to hamstring the fossil fuel industry? Of course not. At the time that he banned fracking, there was a lot of geological studies that New York State actually didn't have the kind of shale reserves that Pennsylvania had. And that New York really became the market for fracked gas. And the NGOs did a great job disconnecting the two, the fracking process, from the market and from the consumption of frack gas. During his tenure, New York State went from, I think, being the fifth largest consumer of fracked gas in the country to 4th, and we are on target now to be the largest consumer of frack gas in the country. So, and we are, one of the largest economies, in the country as well. So it has global implications. What Cuomo has done has global implications. And he used a lot of anti-Trump rhetoric, but Trump and he were both getting money from the same company, from CPV and from their lobbyists. So this is how bipartisan corruption works, right? They buy both sides, and they do it pretty effectively. And Biden is no different. As I said, this company is building these power plants all over the country to serve every major metropolitan area. And so they have to get federal permits. They get state permits, they get federal permits. Almost all of the states in which they build their power plants are Democratic led states: California, Maryland. Now they're in Illinois, Massachusetts, California. So I think Biden, I don't expect a lot from Biden because he's tied by the same fossil fuel interest. The infrastructure bill is also not at all what it started out as. So I'm not optimistic there. In the New York's climate bill, if we were actually going to meet those goals, those benchmarks, and by the way, any bill or any proposal that talks about 2030, 2040, 2050, when we know we have a climate crisis now, should be a non-starter for everybody. But even that bill, the climate bill that New York State passed, which was billed as the boldest climate bill in the entire country, if we were actually meeting those goals, we should be building a windmill a day from the day that bill was passed. So we haven't done that. We haven't built any. So we're 2 years behind already. I guess 700, almost 700 windmills behind. We're not going to do it. It's just a game they play, again, just rhetoric. And so I think it's upon the youth climate movement to get more strict in what they're demanding of these politicians, Biden and Cuomo. I don't have great expectations for Biden either.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I actually want to say that Cuomo has been, more deceptive about fracking because he's tried to label himself out to be an environmentalist, but then defends and approves pipelines and fracking. But I think that actually goes for quite a bit of politicians. So here in California, Newsom has approved 2,691 permits in 2020. So that's double how many permits he approved in 2019. So he doubled those permits in what was the worst fire season and the first ever gigafire that California ever really had. So I think that it should be unacceptable for politicians to label themselves as environmentalists if they're constantly still doing things that damage the environment. And I agree, the youth climate movement, we are definitely planning some things to make sure that we hold them accountable, hold polluters accountable, and then also just keep getting harsher with our demands.
What are those demands? And what are the demands that you're making?
It really changes for every protest and every group doing it. So I think that, one thing that we're really focusing on is divestment for a lot of our demands, divestment, and then also holding polluters accountable and then protecting the people. And so actually my organization, Earth Uprising, we held a summit on throughout Earth Week. And so it was the 21st, I believe, that we held it. And it was basically a youth organized and all youth led panel of, activists. And we talked about issues that were directly affecting youth. And so we of course talked about environmental justice, but we went even farther into there's a lot of youth activists who are protesting in countries and they're risking their lives and they're getting arrested for it. So making sure that youth are protected for, their freedom of speech. And so there's so many, the climate crisis is so intersectional that there's so many issues and demands that we have. And so I think that we change it every time to the current situation to make sure that we get the most action possible.
And any boycotts, anything like that?
Yeah, my generation actually, we are boycotting a lot already. We are already boycotting the most goods and services, mostly because of income inequality. My generation is the poorest generation And so I think that that kind of goes into what we boycott and how we do it.
Yeah, we're spotlighting Alexandria right now. Diana D writes, please spotlight Alexandria. Her message is really important. I don't know if that means like literally like zoom in on or just in general, but either way, they'll make divestments illegal. Just watch. That's a prediction. Yeah. Let me just see. Can you just talk? I think a lot of people know that fracking is bad, but can one of you explain in a kind of accessible way what it does that's so dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, fracking is a new technology that was developed in the late 90s, early 2000s, essentially by Halliburton of Dick Cheney fame, Halliburton. And it basically takes high pressure water and sand and shoots it. Well, first it takes a drill that goes down into the bedrock about a mile deep. And then they have a new technology where they can turn that drill horizontally, laterally, and then they go another mile. And then once they do that, then they shoot under high pressure a ton of different chemicals and water, a lot of water and sand to literally fracture the bedrock. And that releases pockets of methane that have been embedded in that bedrock for millions of years. And all of that, and then they suck all of that out, and then they separate the wastewater from the methane, and then they process the methane and then deliver it to New York City. And New York City's use of gas, you can thank Bloomberg for that. But anyway, the chemicals they use a cocktail of chemicals. Because of the Halliburton loophole, they're not. They don't have to disclose what those chemicals are, and then they distribute that wastewater as brine on the roads for snow for when it snows. So it really permeates the entire environment, and so all of those chemicals and those poisons, it poisons the air, the soil, the water for miles. And then on top of that, I think there was a report that just came out from Physicians for Social Responsibility just a few weeks ago. And they found out that it was Obama's EPA that allowed the fracking industry to use something known as PFAS chemicals. They're known as forever chemicals because they never disintegrate in the environment. They stay in the environment and poison you forever. They don't dissipate. They're highly toxic. They're highly dangerous. And against the advice of EPA's own internal scientists that warn of the public health hazards of these chemicals, the EPA allow the fracking industry to use them anyway. And I just read another article recently that said that as the Arctic ice sheets melt, it's actually releasing PFASs into the atmosphere. So, again, I always say that the public health crisis is the other side of the coin of the climate crisis. They both go hand in hand. What is assaulting the bodies of our children and poisoning our children today is also being released into the atmosphere, creating all of this climate chaos as well. So, I mean, that's what fracking does. Not only that, but all of that material is so deep in the ground that it is bringing up radioactive material to the surface. And as one scientist explained it to me, it took millions of years for life to be to enable life on Earth to develop after all of the radioactive material was buried deep in the soil, and now we're taking all of that and bringing it to the surface. It's a very, very dangerous process. The public health impacts in Pennsylvania, where they're extracting, where they're fracking, Colorado and Wyoming, have been enormous. There's rare childhood cancers that are spreading throughout the fracking fields of Pennsylvania. It's a rare childhood sarcoma that scientists believe are linked to fracking. And it's going to have serious public health consequences long term as well. Immediately, asthma, of course, respiratory illnesses, cardiac disease, all of the illnesses that scientists associate with pollution. But then you have all of those radioactive particles and forever chemicals, and you can't remove them from the environment. It's extremely irresponsible. It's criminal assault. What is happening to these communities, including communities in upstate New York like Minisink, and the politicians as well as the corporations and the company executives that are responsible for this should be held criminally responsible for causing bodily harm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Pramilla. That was a great explanation of it, really. One thing about fracking that always is so upsetting for me is how it poisons the water, because one of those poisons is benzene, which causes neurological damage and cancer, and it gets into our water supply. And this also affects youth the most because our bodies and brains are still developing, and so toxins are amplified in children and causes even more damage. And so there's also some new reports coming out about how neurological damage affects children's ability to focus and learn. And so people are connecting the rise in attention deficit disorder and other neurological issues seen in children to increasing pollution from fossil fuels and processes like fracking. So when people are like, stay in school, children, it's like, if you want us to learn better, stop fracking.
Yeah, seriously.
There's also like a whole range of mental health consequences to just children becoming aware of the imminent crisis of climate change. There's a lot of literature on that as well.
Yeah, it's all these people. You know, it's interesting because I'm reminded of what just happened this weekend, where Biden was saying, because I think everyone's pointing out on this panel, right? Politicians will not save us, but I think that they can be maybe forced to get out of the way a little bit, and to let social movements do things, because Biden, of course, was saying this weekend his hands were tied. He couldn't do anything about the eviction moratorium expiring. And then what happens? You have Cori Bush sleeping outside of the the Capitol on the steps. She herself was formerly unhoused. And then lo and behold, there's an extension. Okay, like, albeit extremely insufficient, a little bit too targeted, not ideal at all. But, this idea that we have to always remember that power is going to say it can't do things that it can. And people have to be really outraged, and people have to constantly be pushing back on that notion. Because I actually think that people, like good people in good faith, don't understand that. And they think, like, when people lay down the rules, that those are just the rules. So we have to constantly, I think, remind people of that also.
Yeah, I mean, I continue to pressure the politicians, absolutely, of course, because they're the ones that are writing policy right now. Well, actually, the NGOs are, but that's a different discussion. But definitely pressure the politicians, but also target the companies. I mean, understanding how that corruption works, I think you need to target both.
Yeah, someone just actually said lawsuits, and I think that's a really important part of it. And actually, there's so many more lawsuits that are happening, and especially that youth are filing against their governments and their countries. And so I'm actually a part of a lawsuit that's through the United Nations. So it's the Children versus Climate Crisis complaint. And so myself, Greta Thunberg, and 14 other children filed a complaint to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, stating that Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Turkey, and France were violating our rights by their inaction on the climate crisis. And so our complaint has been filed as admissible, saying that they do recognize that our rights are being violated. And the committee has held a hearing for us. And so right now we're waiting for all of the countries to respond. And so a lot of people are like, well, why those countries? And it's because they actually they signed the treaty for it, and they said that if they don't uphold their commitments, then we can hold them accountable. And the United States actually isn't part of that, sadly, because they did not ratify the rights of the child at all. which is the most widely ratified treaty in the world. But they also, so it's really upsetting that the U.S. did not do that. And so, but it's really interesting how children are finding all these new loopholes and ways to hold our countries accountable. And there's even more lawsuits that are happening. And so I think that it's important that we keep finding all of those different levels that we can hold people accountable. So lawsuits, protesting, just everything.
And speaking of lawsuits in the legal system and the criminal justice system, or as Gabor Mate likes to call it, the criminal justice system, can Jamie and Pramilla talk about the necessity defense and how you use that and how maybe that can be applied to other things?
Well, it should be applied, but we didn't get to use it because, unfortunately, it's up to the judge. It was then to allow that defense. It worked in Massachusetts. Tim Christensen, I think that the group that he was with, they stopped a pipeline in Massachusetts, and they used the defense. And we tried to do it, and it was thrown out. It was interesting because it was thrown out at a municipal judge's level, with basically because of his ignorance and his I got to call it stupidity in the way he represented the threat that this plant had for the community. He said because it wasn't built, it didn't represent a threat. Therefore, there was no necessity defense, that the harm done by what we were protesting against was worse than the infraction of the law that we broke. But
can you explain, sorry, just so people know what the necessity defense, what that is?
What you are protesting against, the action that you've taken is against a larger threat to the well-being, your own personal well-being and the well-being of the community, than the violation of the law, which is in our particular case was blocking traffic, which has no comparison at all with what that plant is capable, the injury that plant is capable of. And it should be fairly obvious that there comes a point, regardless of the law, that there are consequences that have not been included in the statute, that if you don't resist against that, then nothing changes at all.
Right. So it's like the difference between legal and just, or illegal and unjust.
It is when the law is unjust,
right,
that the necessity defense restores the justice that is necessary.
Right.
But the one thing we did get out of that was the trial in which we had a number of prominent scientists testify about both the public health and climate impacts of the project. And the reason we had to do that, well, there was twofold. A, the media wasn't covering the power plant project at all. And so we did this to get media attention, but also the regulatory agencies, DEC, under the control of King Cuomo, wouldn't accept any of our studies or our data or our testimony about the impacts of the plant. So this was a way of getting all of that scientific testimony on an official record. And
we appealed it. We appealed it, and the appeal was extraordinary. That I don't think the judge even bothered to read it. He just, you're in for trying to get the necessity defense, denied. And it was like 2 seconds. He just turned, because of course they don't want to stop and take a look at the root causes and the injustice. So they just use the system and shine you off.
Yeah. I mean, we would be naive to think that any of the institutions and organizations that are a product of a system that is very dependent on the money from extracting recklessly from the earth, we would be naive to think that any of these institutions are actually going to stop that process. Right. But the point is to expose them, whether it's the media or the courts or the regulatory agencies or the politicians. The whole point is to expose them so that people can start becoming aware of this systemic corruption and then say, hey, I want to do something about this. I don't want to accept this any longer.
And do you guys have faith in the necessity defense being used in other cases, or is it just too?
Oh no, it should be used as much as possible.
Yeah.
Until it becomes precedent. Until people understand that there's a higher law.
Right. Yeah, that was something Martin Luther King talked about a lot.
Correct.
Because obviously those things were, illegal.
If the courts fail, you call it the court. If the judge fails, you call it the judge. I mean, just keep going. We have no choice. We really don't have much of a choice.
And someone asked how Alexandria, sorry. Okay, guys, I'm not going to yell at you, but can you have normal names, especially if we have a young person on the show? All right. Some unicorn. How does Alexandria feel about Extinction Rebellion? I shouldn't even acknowledge that. Anyway, we're all adults here. Okay.
I think that Extinction Rebellion, when I first got involved in activism, was around the time when I think that they first started to be active, or they started to really start protesting, like in the UK. So I really think that XR taught me a lot about civil disobedience, and I think that civil disobedience is really important. And so I always say that the climate movement is like this vast ecosystem, because there's so many different organizations out there, and they all focus on different issues and different ways of taking action. So Extinction Rebellion focuses on more of the direct action and the civil disobedience. My organization focuses on climate education, and then there's other organizations like 0 Hour that focus on systems of oppression. And there's way more organizations out there than that, and all of them are so important because the climate movement needs action in every single different way. Of course, I think each movement does have its struggles, and they're challenged by making our movement, even more active, more intersectional. And so it is a privilege to be arrested. And I think that, I really appreciate how Extinction Rebellion was using the privilege that they had to be arrested, because it was bringing attention to the issue.
Yeah. Someone, by the way, on Twitter said, "Hi, Katie. Can I correct a point on the chat tonight? Fracking began in Scotland in 1851, invented by James Paraffin Young."
Not high volume hydraulic fracturing, which is what we have today.
There you go. I knew it. I knew the truth would be spoken. Not high. What is it? Not high
volume hydraulic fracturing.
Exactly what I was going to say.
I mean, the technology to move those drills laterally is just happened a decade and a half ago. So no.
Right. And any final words? This has been so great. I have so many more questions, obviously, but I want to, can't keep you guys here all night.
Don't despair. Struggle. Resist. Question authority, and find your own path. We can save this planet. The planet will be here, but we can save life on this planet if we all work together.
Yeah, I think my final thing is that now is the time to be an activist, even more so than I feel like it's so important right now to be doing something about all the issues that we have, and support the youth climate movement in any way that you can, of course. And I can't wait to see what we do this year, and especially when we get to a post-pandemic world.
And I would say find the truth. Seek the truth. The truth shall set you free.
And despite planting that as the last question, one more thing I want to ask you about. Alexandria, what is All We Can Save?
Oh, yes. All We Can Save is one of my favorite books. It's basically this anthology that includes voices of over 60 women who are leading in climate. And so it's edited by Catherine Wilkinson and Ayanna Johnson. And so myself and another activist, Shea Vestida, are the two youth voices in it. And so it's the first time that I've, ever been in a book and ever written anything for it. And so I have an essay in it called A Letter to Adults. And it's basically just this, call to adults to support youth and, amplify us and join our movement, especially. And so it's a really incredible book. I recommend you all get it because it's now available in paperback. And so the reason why I love All We Can Save is because it contains history, it contains solutions. It's really this this book that basically, has every different area of like climate change that you need to read about. And so I really like it because it also gives motivation and hope. And so if you ever feel hopeless, it's definitely the book to read because it kind of gives you a new perspective on the climate crisis.
Great. Anyone else have any other questions, comments, recommendations? All right. So we figured it all out. Maybe not all of it, but we figured part of it out. This is the first working.
Katie, I do have one question because my fans will kill me if I don't ask Mr. Cockrum himself what he thinks about our real class of billionaire astronauts, the Jeff Bezos's launch, and what you think of that, because they're modeling themselves after the character you played in Star Trek in a lot of ways, sometimes explicitly so. So what do you think of how do our Zephyrin Cockrums compare to Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musk of the world?
Can you just explain that to the people who don't know that reference?
Oh, yes, I should. So Zephyrin Cockrum in the Star Trek universe was the first man who was able to travel faster than light, which got the attention of the other alien races and helped elevate humanity, take them to the stars. Basically was this pivotal moment in humanity where we turned away from capitalism and exploring our planet to exploring the universe and bringing light and working for the embedment of all humanity. I don't think that the Jeff Bezos launch is quite inspiring the same notion. In fact, he said he just wanted us to go and mine on the moon.
Yeah, I really like Zephyrin Cochrane, and the Bezoses and the other people are wankers, in my personal opinion. And it has nothing to do with the aspirations of humanity to bring the miracle of what it is to be conscious in the universe. Instead, it's a way to aggrandize themselves. It's for their ego, and also because I think in the back of their minds they think, well, we screwed up this place, we can go to some other place, we'll live some other place, and we'll leave it to them to go through the hell that we've created. And you can tell, because when Bezos says, I want to thank all the people who work at Amazon and the people who buy at Amazon because, well, they paid for it. That's right, they paid for it. They work their asses off, and all that money goes to a man who has nothing better to do with his life than take his ass out into space and flit around in his little space capsule and come back with that grin on his face. And I think it's deplorable. I think they're nuts.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Thank you.
Yes. And of course, I just want to share that people may not know this, but it's very moving. You became Jamie became a vegan after Babe, correct?
Yeah.
I don't eat. I'm not there yet, but I'm a vegetarian since the age of 11 because I love pigs. I think they're so cute and smart and adorable. So that's why I don't eat meat.
Actually, all animals are adorable.
They are. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I don't think chickens are adorable. That doesn't mean that it's right for me to eat them. I'm just saying, like on a visceral level, I just want to hug a pig in a way I don't want to hug a chicken.
Yeah.
Maybe I haven't met the right chicken.
I don't think you the right chicken. Chickens are kind of cute, Katie.
Chicken are good.
Yeah.
Smart and courageous, and not at all how they're projected to be.
Yeah. I mean, they're very rational. I realize because when they're running around with their heads cut off, that's an unfair.
Yeah. Do you want to adopt my rooster?
Do you have a rooster? Do you have a rooster?
Yeah. Yeah, and he's a real cock.
Really?
Yeah.
I think that's my son, actually, in the Chinese zodiac.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think chicken is mine actually.
Oh, there you go. Anyone else know theirs?
Yeah, dragon.
Dragon. Okay. What are your guys' birthdays?
Mine is 64. I don't know.
I think I'm dog.
Dog, my favorite. I should bring Bodhi onto the show. Well, it's your. Is it based on the year or is it based on the? Oh, it's based on the year.
Based on the year
Oh,
of a Chinese year, not our year.
Oh, okay. So I have to do. Yeah, we'll have to prepare this in advance.
You have to go to a Chinese restaurant, and when they serve you, before they serve you your meal, they put a piece of paper down, and it shows the zodiac. Chinese.
Oh, I think that's actually maybe how I found mine out.
Yeah.
It may actually be. Well, thank you guys so much, and we're going to do it. And after, we're going to do a special continued stream with Pramilla, if you're still game. We're going to kind of talk about Andrew Cuomo.
Sure, my best buddy, Andrew.
Yeah, yeah. We figure we want to. He's not getting enough credit for the creep he is in this field, and we don't want to leave. Again, he's so versatile that we want to make sure we highlight all of his.
He's gonna hear about it in about 5 minutes once she starts talking.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Well, so
he's a Renaissance guy when it comes to corruption.
Yeah, exactly a sleazeball. Yeah, he's a sleazeball of many talents, many outlets.
I just want to say one thing, Kitty.
Yeah, of course.
I was really appalled at the reaction of many people, supposedly who are climate activists and who are progressives, to Michael Moore's film, Planet of the Humans. And especially from people who understand how difficult it is to raise the money and put together a documentary in a certain amount of time, so that the thing you shot first is not out of date by the time you get to the edit, but also not addressing the questions raised by that documentary, which is what Michael put his name on it for, so that there would be a discussion about, are we going in the right direction with windmills and solar panels, which are just as destructive to the environment and maybe even more so. And I thought that it was egotistical, short-sighted, cowardly, and banal of the criticism that came out of the mouths of people who should know better. They should go back and they owe Michael an apology, and then let's have a discussion about the very issues he raised. And there's a program.
Yes, let's do it. I had Michael Moore on my show, and then we had him on Useful Idiots. And yeah, because honestly, if you want to get Matt Taibbi's interest, all you have to do is try to censor something or shut it down. And I had him on the show anyway, but
Katie actually covered that controversy extensively. You're not giving yourself enough credit. You were on the ball about exactly this when it happened.
Yeah, I got some interesting pushback. I
must say the NGOs, in my experience, that it was deplorable, the lack of support, and how far they went in the other direction. They actually contributed to the creating of an organization of small grassroots NGOs to create a larger footprint for the positions that we hold and the causes that we wanted to raise. And they did it entirely to subvert the process so that they could get a bill passed through the New York legislature, which is, as Pramilla will tell you, is incredibly flawed. That was New York Renews, and then it was renamed, and that was really low. That people will stoop to do that, pervert something as important as this is cowardly in the extreme.
Yeah, I think that's another discussion. We should have a whole other show on that, the NGO industrial complex, because a lot of people don't know that about how, I don't know if you know about this, Alexandria, because this sounds so condescending. I can't believe I said that, but I don't know if you've come up against them yet, but they, we have to be vigilant, because a lot of people who I grew up thinking were great people, great organizations. You nailed it, Alexandra, when you talked about how certain slogans are like developed by corporations, right? Like your carbon footprint, but it's really disturbing to see this happening at NGOs, not just corporations. So we'll have to do a whole other show on that.
I'm sure I think that there's a lot in there that's kind of, there's a lot to talk about in that area.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This is great. Let's have more. Got to have more of these. We can have a weekly chat. Just kidding. That would be that. It may require that though to get to the solution. But thank you so much. And I'll put if there are any things people want to shout out, like organizations or actions, let me know. I'll put it in the description, or you can shout it out now.
I mean, we have a petition because we're still asking for both the permits for the power plant to be rescinded and revoked based on the corruption convictions, and also we're asking for oversight hearings so that New Yorkers could know how this corruption transpired. That's tinyurl/built-on-bribes. tinyurl.com/built-on-bribes.
Okay, cool. tinyurl.com. I'll find it, and you're sticking around, so I can make sure to tinyurl.com/built. Okay.
If you love animals, don't eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll help.
Yeah. All right, I'll do that. Thank you so much, everyone.
God bless.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice
meeting you guys.
That was great, huh?
That was.
That was great. Yeah. I know Leslie had to, I believe, walk his dog, but he's going to come back. Oh, and we got a Patreon. Thank you so much for everyone. Please, of course, consider becoming Patreon supporters to help make this show happen. And I will see you guys next show. All right. Bye, everyone. I feel like I really should skip them some Brody. She's so cute. She's to the left of me. Bye, everyone.